This video is about standardized MedDRA queries, or SMQs. This presentation assumes that the viewer has a good working knowledge of the basic structure, content, scope, and placement rules of MedDRA. If this is not the case for you, you may wish to first view the MedDRA scope and structure video before you view this one. First, a note about MedDRA itself. MedDRA was developed under the auspices of the International Conference on Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Registration of Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, or ICH. The activities of the MedDRA Maintenance and Support Services Organization, or MSSO, are overseen by an ICH MedDRA Management Board, which is composed of the 6 ICH parties: the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency of the UK, Health Canada, and the WHO as an observer. First, a disclaimer and copyright statement. This presentation is protected by copyright and may be used, reproduced, incorporated into other works, adapted, modified, translated, or distributed under a public license, provided that ICH's copyright is acknowledged at all times. In case of any adaptation, modification, or translation of the presentation, reasonable steps must be taken to clearly label, demarcate, or otherwise identify that changes were made to or based on the original presentation. Any impression that the adaptation, modification, or translation of the original presentation is endorsed or sponsored by the ICH must be avoided. The presentation is provided as is without warranty of any kind. ICH and the authors of the original presentation will in no event be liable for any claim, damages, or other liability arising from the use of this presentation. The previously mentioned permissions do not apply to content supplied by third parties. Therefore, for documents where the copyright vests in a third party, permission for reproduction must be obtained from this copyright holder. Let's first consider the background of SMQ development. SMQs have been developed jointly by CIOMS, the Council for the International Organization of Medical Sciences, and ICH. CIOMS and ICH have established terms of reference for the joint development of SMQs. However, SMQ maintenance is the joint responsibility of the MedDRA user community and the MSSO through a change request process, similar to the maintenance of MedDRA itself. More on that later. Within the CIOMS working group is an ICH advisory panel, whose function is ICH oversight of the development of SMQs. It is the ICH advisory panel that determines which topics proposed by MedDRA users will be developed into SMQs. Now for the definition of SMQs. SMQs are groupings of terms, usually from multiple MedDRA SOCs, related to a defined medical condition or area of interest. The included terms relate to signs, symptoms, diagnoses, syndromes, physical findings, laboratory and other physiologic test data, all related to the medical condition or area of interest. Let's consider the development status of SMQs. As of MedDRA version 15.1, there are 87 SMQ topics in production. By in production, I mean available to all MedDRA subscribers. This is a list of a few SMQ topics currently in production. As you can see, they are generally topics of particular interest to the biopharmaceutical industry and regulatory authorities. For the most up-to-date list of SMQs in production or under development by the CIOMS SMQ Working Group, please visit the MSSO website at this link. Let's look at some SMQ data characteristics. The basic unit of an SMQ is a PT, although all PTs of a given HLT could be included. All LLTs linked to an included PT are also part of an SMQ. An LLT is part of an SMQ only if its parent PT is too. Almost all SMQs have narrow and broad scope terms. In fact, this is the basic type of SMQ. The narrow scope terms confer specificity to the search results because the terms themselves are highly likely to identify cases of interest. The broad scope terms confer sensitivity to the search results because the terms, due to their broad nature, will generally retrieve additional cases of interest, but may also retrieve some cases that may not be of interest. However, the trade-off of using the broad scope terms is that there is a lower likelihood of a case of interest being missed. When performing a narrow search, you use the narrow scope terms. When performing a broad search, both the narrow and broad scope terms, that is, all of the terms in the SMQ, are used. This shows an example of a narrow and broad type of SMQ, the one for lactic acidosis. On the upper right, you can see that there are three PTs, blood lactic acid increased, hyperlactacidemia, and lactic acidosis, that represent the narrow scope terms of this SMQ. I'm sure you'll agree that any cases or events represented by these three terms are likely to be cases of interest. Below the narrow terms is the list of broad terms that include PTs such as acidosis, blood pH decreased, and metabolic acidosis, among others. Although these terms are not specific for lactic acidosis, from a safety assessment point of view, it might be worthwhile to consider such cases or events as part of your analysis in certain circumstances. Some SMQs are algorithmic in nature. For these SMQs, the broad scope terms are further divided into categories, and combinations of terms in these categories associated with a single case may result in better case identification and less noise. This is an example of the algorithmic SMQ anaphylactic reaction. This slide shows the narrow terms, which again are highly likely to retrieve cases of interest. In algorithmic SMQs, the narrow terms are always called Category A. This slide shows now the broad terms, or at least some of the broad terms, of SMQ anaphylactic reaction. As you can see, the broad terms can be further subdivided into categories for upper airway and respiratory issues, for angioedema and urticaria issues, and for cardiovascular and hypotension issues. The principle of an algorithmic SMQ is that if a single case contains some defined combination of more than one broad term, it is more likely to be a case of interest than if it only had one broad term. For SMQ anaphylactic reaction, a case of interest is one that contains either any term from Category A, that is, any narrow term, or a term from Category B and a term from Category C, or a term from either Category B or Category C, plus a term from Category D. So in other words, a case containing both PT bronchial edema and PT erythema is more likely to be a case of interest related to anaphylaxis than a case that has only PT erythema. Some SMQs are hierarchical. That is, they are a set of queries related to one another in a hierarchical relationship. It is important to note that the hierarchical relationship between SMQs does not relate in any way to the MedDRA hierarchy of terms. For SMQs, the hierarchy consists of one or more subordinate SMQs that are combined to create a superordinate, more inclusive SMQ. Here is an example of a hierarchical set of SMQs. The term content of the Level 1 SMQ, which is SMQ hematopoietic cytopenias, is formed by a combination of the term content of the 4 subsearch SMQs for hematopoietic erythropenia, leukopenia, thrombocytopenia, and cytopenias affecting more than one blood cell type. These 4 subsearches are Level 2 SMQs. It is important to note that each of the 4 Level 2 SMQs, such as SMQ hematopoietic erythropenia, is also a standalone SMQ and can be used as such if the user wishes to retrieve only cases related to this particular form of cytopenia. Hierarchical SMQs can have as many as 5 levels, as for SMQ hepatic disorders, or as few as 2 levels, as in this example for hematopoietic cytopenias. Within the SMQ ASCII files are 3 text fields, which are important for users to know about. The description field gives a brief definition of the SMQ topic. The source field cites the medical references used to build the term content of the SMQ. And the development note contains useful information for proper use of the SMQ. For example, in the development note is where you will find the description of an SMQ's algorithm, if applicable. Now let's learn about SMQ testing and production maintenance. Once it is decided to begin developing an SMQ topic, the SIOM's SMQ Working Group team prepares for testing of the SMQ during its development. The working group team generally tries to perform the testing in at least one regulatory and one company database, although this can vary depending upon availability of test products and databases. The team tests the candidate SMQ's initial term list, generally on products that are known to have the particular safety issue related to the SMQ. These are called the positive controls, and on products that do not have that particular safety issue. These are called the negative controls. The cases retrieved by the candidate SMQ term list are reviewed for relevance, and the list is refined based on testing results. For example, if a broad term initially included in the term list is demonstrated by testing to retrieve a lot of non-relevant cases, this PT could be considered noisy and subsequently excluded from the term list. It may take a few to many test runs on the available databases to fine-tune the SMQ term list until the SMQ working group is satisfied that it is ready to be put into production, that is, made available to all MedDRA users. Once put into production by the MSSO, the SMQ may undergo even further refinement based on feedback and change requests from users. Once in production, maintenance of an SMQ is through the MSSO's change request process. The change request process for SMQs is similar to that for MedDRA, but without the 7 to 10 day time limit for disposition of a request. Besides considering MedDRA user change requests for production SMQs, the MSSO also performs maintenance related to MedDRA version changes, such as consideration of new terms, promoted LLTs, demoted PTs, and move terms. After an SMQ has been in production for 18 to 24 months, the SIOM's SMQ Working Group reviews changes to the SMQ to determine the need for any additional refinements to the term list. SMQ change requests are considered simple changes to the terminology, and therefore they are processed and implemented for both the March and September MedDRA releases. As simple change requests, each SMQ change request from a MedDRA subscriber is considered as part of the 100 changes allotted monthly per subscriber organization. So, as you might expect, SMQs can change over time based on routine MedDRA maintenance. Note that updated SMQs are released with each new MedDRA version. It is important to understand that for the optimal use of SMQs, the version of the SMQ should match the MedDRA version of the coded data that are being queried. If not, unexpected query results could occur. Let's look at some SMQ applications. SMQs may have a variety of applications. In the clinical trials setting, multiple SMQs may be used as a routine screening tool when the product's safety profile is not fully established. Also, selected SMQs may be used to evaluate and monitor a previously identified safety issue, such as a known class effect or a safety issue from preclinical data. In the post-marketing setting, selected SMQs can be used to retrieve cases for a suspected or known safety issue. Multiple SMQs might be used in safety signal detection. SMQs could be implemented into tools that alert the safety assessor of a new case or event whose term belongs to an SMQ of interest. And SMQs may be used for periodic reporting, that is, aggregate cases or events for safety and other issues, for example, lack of efficacy. SMQs are important not only to companies, but also to regulatory authorities. For example, reviewers at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration have the capacity to use SMQs on MedDRA-coded data that are submitted to them. To summarize, in this brief video, we covered the following topics: the background of SMQ development, the definition of an SMQ, the development status of SMQs, SMQ data characteristics, SMQ testing and maintenance, and SMQ applications. Here are ways you can get in contact with the MedDRA MSSO, including our website address and our help desk contact information. Thank you very much for your time and attention.